We are joined by South African rape survivor, author, and motivational speaker Lynn Hill. She is the author of Butterfly, My Soul Got Wings, What Life Has Taught Me, Book 1. In this podcast, as in her book, she details the sexual assaults that changed her life and her journey to resilience and recovery. Okay, Lynn, thank you very much for doing this interview. I appreciate that.
All good.
So, where I'm going to start is, sexual assault has kind of become an epidemic in South Africa for quite some time. Many of the women who have been sexually assaulted in South Africa live in abject poverty. Is that the kind of background that you grew up in?
Actually, not Morgan. I was born into a family of color. So, as a child of the 60s, I was born into the apartheid era, and my background was pretty typical middle class colored, as we would have called it. So, all physiological needs really met for all of my childhood. Physiological needs, emotional needs, a pretty normal childhood, I would say.
And were you aware that sexual assault was a serious problem throughout the country, that it was something that couldn't be avoided, from what I can tell?
I was not aware of that at all. We are talking about 1983 here. So, organizations like Red Crisis, they were existent already. But the scourge was nothing compared to what it is today. So in my pretty sheltered childhood, I was focusing on art, and I was focusing on ballet, and I was focusing on athletics. My focus was obviously as a baby girl. It was really not on sexual assault. In fact, I had, up to the day that I was brutalized, I had not heard of anyone in my area or my community or my school having been raped. So we're speaking a pretty long while ago. We're speaking when things like this weren't even spoken about anyway. In fact, it was the expectation of the perpetrator's family that I remain silent. They wanted to negotiate for silence. And I think a lot of women in that era and prior really were silenced to silence. The stigmatization, the victimization, to just speak out, and I'm sure we're going to get to that when you ask me the justice question later. So I had absolutely no idea that something like this existed, let alone would happen to me.
And how old were you the first time you experienced it?
I was only 15.
15. And
I was,
so how did it happen? Was this was the perpetrator somebody you knew?
I did not know the perpetrator personally, but the perpetrator did belong to my church. And our paths had crossed by virtue of a communal older person whom I had trusted. And I went along with this person to attend a New Year's party. And, I was not even aware that the perpetrator was at this function. It was a pretty intimate party, but I was by myself because the much older teenagers and young adults were in another part of the house. So I was watching a Jane Fonda movie for all of the night, basically by myself. So I
And
had no idea that, uh, you know, that the perpetrator was in my midst. The
and
perpetrator, like I said, belonged to my church, and it is alleged that the my brutalization was about the third brutalization. So we were dealing with someone who was serial. He was a serial rapist. I was about the third girl in the church. But the difference between me and the others is that he lost it with me. Um, the level of brutality was of such that they thought a train had ridden over my face at the police station. I lost consciousness. I died. I crossed over onto the other side, and I regained consciousness. The estimation is that I was brutalized for about 45 minutes to an hour nonstop.
so this wasn't just a sexual assault. He also just assaulted you physically as well. It was like a very vicious kind of attack.
It was it was absolutely vicious. Vicious to the degree and strategic in his viciousness, if I might add, because what the viciousness did was it literally pulverized my body. And with the pulverization came obviously just non resistance and an absolute physical weakening. So I believe it was strategic because when he was done beating me to a pulp, that was when he actually, did his thing on the floor, forced entry to a point that all I felt was really being stabbed internally repeatedly. He did try when I was standing. He tried to rape me anally as well. I screamed. I resisted as much as I could. By that time, I was so weak already. So this happened in a toilet, and each time I screamed, I would get a bashing against the tiles. And that really was, the silencing was to let him just have his way with me. That was his strategy.
And did you suffer any physical consequences that last to this day?
Yes, I did. My eyes are damaged. The muscles of my eyes are damaged to this day. My eyes were beaten closed. They were beaten shut when I came out of 72-hour sedation. I knew that, and I could feel that it was not me. So everything 72 hours later had reached a maximum swelling. My head, my ears, everything. Had I died, the coffin would not have been able to be opened because I literally was beaten beyond recognition. To a point that the rape charge, 7 months later in the regional court, became an attempted murder charge because the evidence, the physical evidence, really showed that the level of brutalization was of such that it was murder. It was attempted murder. There was just no stopping him.
Now, was your second incident with presumably with another perpetrator, was that just as bad, or was it different in another way?
It was totally different. The rape at 15 was a exceptionally horrific brutalization, sexual brutalization, and like you said, physical brutalization. The rape at 51 was a drug rape.
So you're not
And
conscious?
I was not conscious at all.
Oh, I see. What drug did he use?
I have no idea. I did not know the perpetrators. I believe, my soul believes, the odor on my body believed that it was a gang rape. 6 hours of my life was unaccounted for. I was lured to a restaurant under the pretense, or well, what I thought was going to be a restaurant, in the heart of the business hub in Johannesburg. It called Sandton, and when someone says, "I've got a business meeting in Sandton and I'd like you to accompany me," it was with the purest of intent that I actually went with. In fact, I went with to protect the person who was going to the meeting, because she appeared to be pretty vulnerable, in a vulnerable condition, a compromised condition. And I went with to protect her. I got to the venue. The venue did not look like, it was not according to my meeting, the Lynn meeting standards venue. I felt that something was off. It was just not the caliber of individuals at the venue. Everything about the venue was not the kind of place that I go to have my own meetings. And I remember asking, where is the CEO that this individual whom I accompanied her to meet? And they said, well, he's going to be another 20 minutes. And, while waiting, they said, but, considering it's not your meeting, what would you like to drink? And I ordered a glass of dry white wine. That was my last memory.
And were you? Did you also experience physical effects from this incident that carry on to this day? Did they do anything damaging to your body?
Well, the immediate damage was that I needed to go on ARVs, a very high dosage of ARVs for 30 days after. The trauma for the second one was of such, in fact, my body, my cells had reached a saturation point in terms of the trauma. This, I think, was the lid that my body could handle on of trauma, because, there was the one rape, there was life in between that, which was also pretty emotionally traumatic. And then there was this. My body literally, my mind and my heart was strong. I released, I forgave, but my body suffered to a point that my heart rate remained irregular for about 10 months. My blood pressure remained high. The shock was totally absorbed in my system, to a point that a dog bark, unexpected car screech, that would have me palpitate.
And
so the post-traumatic... Sorry?
I was going to say, speaking of the trauma, has that affected your ability to carry on an intimate relationship with a man? Do you get flashbacks? Does that affect it at all?
I think at 15, the effects after 15 was definitely, with both 15 and 51, the post-traumatic stress disorder was pretty hectic. With the 15-year-old experience, the post-traumatic stress disorder set in exactly 1 year later. So between 15 and 16, what I really did was a lot of repression, a lot of deflection. Obviously, by that, at that time, not knowing what these principles were called, it was my studies in psychology that had me later identify the defense mechanisms I was employing. But as a 15-year-old, I could not process what had happened to me. In fact, when I woke up out of sedation and I forced my eyes open because I wanted to see myself, I literally looked at a horror mask from a movie. And I told myself when I looked in the mirror that that was not who I was. But in that very moment, I did not also know if I could ever become who I was before this ever again. And when that horror mask stared back at me, it was really my moment of detachment, which became, I guess, in retrospect, my moment of sanity. I had to detach and say that this was not me. This could not have happened to me. And so I did a lot of burying, obviously. That which you bury yourself with is self-judgment, blame, shame. You were dealing with a judgmental society, a self-righteous community, where when a girl is raped, and even up to this day, you are asked, what did you do wrong? What were you wearing? You know, how did you look for it? And that really, you know, becomes secondary victimization. So to get back to your question, the post-traumatic stress disorder at 15 kicked in full-fledged at 16. The flashbacks, the nightmares, to a point of then becoming depression, no eating, no sleeping. And I don't think it affected I was not planning to be intimate with anybody until I married. In fact, when I was raped at 15, I was absolutely untouched. I had only one French kiss. And that was the only physical contact I had ever had with anybody. So I fell pregnant at 19. You asked about injuries earlier. I was told I'd never be able to have kids. I struck a pretty significant relationship at the age of 18. I thought that was the person I would be spending the rest of my life with. I fell pregnant at 19. And obviously I married. It was the right moral thing to do, the Christian thing to do. As I wrote my book, it was really, wow, you know, you were such a baby. You were in such an unhealed state. In fact, psychologically, you were so compromised. My self-worth was nothing compared to where it had to be. And I think that truly affected the quality of the choices I made. And I also think that I had to, at a very deep level, at a deep unconscious level, I wanted to prove to myself that I was actually capable of intimacy, you know, and I stepped into a marriage. It lasted for 17 years. So from an intimacy perspective, a physical perspective, I tried very hard, and I think I healed enough. But there was a lot of other factors that really got in the way of a fully fledged, functional, significant relationship. And it wasn't the rape that had anything, you know, to do with the adversity of that particular situation and the emotional challenges that situation presented.
As an outsider, what I wonder about is how this widespread phenomenon of sexual assault is happening. How did the world of men in South Africa bring themselves to the point where they, and I have read about how they all consider this a rite of passage for a young man. Sometimes it's done in groups. It's just so common. So do you have any theories about how this came to be?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the scourge has increased by virtue of the fact that our particular society has become a society of non-consequence. We had a president who raped, and he did not have to face any consequence. So the excusability of a violation that gets hidden behind the throes of cultural norms or even religion. You have women who are raped, but because of the silence that the religion calls for in terms of male domination and female submission, these women don't speak out. I did 2 radio shows consecutively, and between those 2 radio shows, I had 2 70-year-old women reach out to me and say, we've been quiet, Lynn, we've been silent for 30 years. And so between 2 women, there was the breaking of a combined 60-year silence. So I think the stigmatization has really led to that silence. I think by the time, when a woman is violated, she is silenced in so many ways, and she's trying to process what has just gone down. She does not know who to go to, and most particularly young people here, and even I guess the older folk, your greatest fear as a victim is that you are going to be judged. Your greatest fear is, what are they going to think? What are they going to say? I don't want to come across as a cheap woman. And so really what has happened in South Africa, there is the justice system, number one, is fallible. The person who raped me belonged to my community. And 3 days after I was raped, this person was released on a 500 Rand bail. So what that meant for me was that I was living in a state of perpetual fear. Remember, I was 15. Here he was in the community. I feared that he would come back to kill me so that I would not be able to testify. The fact that I had actually gone as far as making a case, opening a criminal case against this individual, was something that was not the norm then. And I just could not do it. And thank goodness, my parents were amazing. They supported me. They were the ones who insisted on the photographs. And had it not been for that photographs, literally, it would have boiled down to a lack of evidence. It would have boiled down to my word against his, although the district surgeon, which was the medical component of the investigation, that in undeniable terms verified that I was raped, that I had struggled. My nails were very short, but there was skin under my nails. So the resistance was there. I literally fought for my life. And when I look, one of your other questions was, did the justice system serve you? What was the justice system like? On both counts, I think, in various ways, the system failed me, and it didn't just fail me, it's still busy failing women. So you have a rapist who can apply for bail. What happens when he lives in your community? You are living in a state of perpetual fear, like I said. The rape charge was transformed into the attempted murder charge. That meant that the maximum sentencing was going to be transformed from 10 years to, the state was pleading for a minimum of 25 years, which was then the minimum for attempted murder. He walked away with only 10 years. I was told many, many years later that he served only a fraction of his sentence because while he was in prison, the church had given him a character reference, and he got out way before the time. He has a lifelong court order. to remain 400 meters of me any moment when he recognizes me. But at the end of the day, your question was, how was justice served, and was justice served? And my answer on both counts would be no, in two different ways. At 15, justice was not served, because I said justice really it's a very relative term. And at 15, what he stole, what he violated, I called and I referred to in my one article as it was the demolition of my soul. And 10 years, I remember, after facing court, after being victimized by his legal counsel, being told in court that I had put this together. I had an intelligent mind, and I had imagined all of this up. And that was the level of abuse and victimization that I had to go through in court as well, to a point that on the second day of sentencing, I actually did not want to go back in the court. And I stayed outside, and they came out, and I remember the look on my parents' faces and my teacher's face, and I just knew. And I heard 10 years, and I think that was the last thing I heard for that day. I didn't know which was worse, whether the horror mask and looking at that in the mirror, or just in that moment needing to come to terms with the fact that I had been through so much, was fighting for justice and for all the others who had been raped and had not had the opportunity to collect evidence, had not had the opportunity to walk the due process miles and the support to do that. And there I was, not just fighting for me, but fighting for all others. And I remember hearing he got 10 years, and everything about the rest of that day was a blur. I felt betrayed by the justice system. I felt betrayed by males. The justice system was really, the judge and his two assessors were male. The legal counsel was male. And for me, really, it became a further representation of victimization and attaching violation. This time the violation felt different. This time it was judicial violation. But it ate at me, and it angered me. And my anger for many years, because again, I was only 16, so I did not know what to do with it. Yes, I attended therapy for a year at the age of 16 to 17, when I was in the depths of post-trauma. But I buried it and I deflected and drew my worth from my school grades. So the justice system betrayed me, and that is why, this is one of the reasons, I think a primary reason why women do not want to go through, when they're going through the legality of this, it really becomes another level of violation, where you are needing to fight for a truth which by itself does not need to be fought for by virtue of innocence. And so that was pretty hectic. On the second count, it was not so much a justice system that betrayed me, in as much as it was another system that the individual whom I trusted refused to provide the evidence for me to actually open the case. And I walked away from it. I walked away from it because I also, my body, I don't think could have handled more trauma. And I walked away from it.
And you've
Yeah, you
Oh,
wanted to
I was going
ask
to
them?
ask you if you've known other women from South Africa who have had these similar experiences, and have they been affected to the same way you have, worse or to a lesser extent? And what do you find is a trend in terms of the consequences to them on the long term?
I come across those women all of the time. Um, I'm a counselor. One of the things I do is I counsel. I counsel not just women. I counsel men, and of course, rape is an issue that repeatedly comes to the fore. I think context, level of damage, level of betrayal, level of violation, that sometimes is varied. But the one thing I'll never forget in an Oprah Tyler Perry interview was where he spoke of his own molestation, and he said, "Pain is pain," and pain is pain. And because we are unique individuals, we process that pain very, very differently. Um, not all of us are as resilient, and really, it's about having come across women who never ever get over the fact that they were brutalized. It's really about sharing my story, and one of the reasons why I think I chose to do this was when I was going through my post-traumatic stress disorder at the age of 16, I had this voice say to me, "Lynn, if you did not die when you were supposed to, you had to be living for a reason far greater than your dying." And when I share my story, as recent as Saturday, I was sharing at a children's village, a children's orphanage, little knowing that the house mothers would be present. And what I've discovered that in sharing my story, I give others the license to share theirs as well. When they get to realize that I've been able to be strong through this, they are able to draw strength from my strength. Marianne Williamson says, "As we let our light shine, we unconsciously give others permission to do the same. And as we are liberated from our own fears, our presence automatically liberates others." And I think sharing my story has really, it has, and as much as it's brought about healing in the lives of others, it's also brought about healing in my own life. Each time you share it, you become an observer in it. You asked about the damage that had happened, the physical damage. One of the damages that became absolutely it was like an epidemic that I needed to deal with for 27 years after the 15-year-old rape, and that was chronic bladder, womb, and tube infections. That my entire sacral area, actually the area that had been violated, that had been damaged, was the very area that was manifesting my anger and my unforgiveness. And it was when I released this individual at the age of 38, while needing to prepare to go into a prison as part of a project and meet the head of two prison gangs, which were rape gangs. I needed to write a poem. I needed to visit that grave on that day. All of those buried memories, I said to God, I'm not ready to do this. And yet, if I'm being called to do it, I'm going to do that. That is how fearless I needed to prove I had become, how resilient I had become. And I reckoned that if I did not die, then perhaps this was the greatest purpose, to come face to face with rapists and say, hey, it's not on. Violation is not on. This is not power. This is mystified power. This is borrowed power. It's not real power. And I wrote the rape poem. And when I wrote the rape poem, in rereading it, I wrote it with the vividity as if it had happened only 3 days ago. So I really revisited the experience. But when I reread it, I really became an observer. And as I read what he was calling them while he was raping me, that was my moment of epiphany. That was my moment of saying, but hey, woman, you were not the damaged one. This individual had immense anger towards his mother and his sister, and you became an object of his displaced anger for that 45 minutes to 60 minutes, and it was not fair. But in that moment, I realized that if I could have been the spectator here and was not the damaged one, he really was the damaged one. And what I, very, not strange, but you call this program Human Monsters. Mm-hmm. And for 27 years, 26 years, I considered this individual to be a monster because I could not see him as a human being, because what human being violates another to a point of pulverizing? In fact, and it's not about me, so many other women have gone through this, of the level of violation and the level of physical and emotional and sexual assault. But in that moment, when I realized, wait a minute, I became an object of your displaced anger, that was really my moment of saying, but wait a minute, this was never about me, it was about you. Aha, I'm going to release you because you don't belong in my system. And the moment I did that, I literally released the dis-ease from my body, and I have never, ever experienced a bladder, womb, or tube infection in the past, I don't know how many years, I'm 52 now. And that is the level of mind, body, spirit alignment. And so I teach women to let go. I teach men to let go as well. But that really was one of the physical ailments that I lived with. And I guess indirectly as well as indirectly, consciously as well as subconsciously, a result of my assault at 15.
And one of the most horrific aspects of this phenomenon that I read about and that I covered in the episode about the rape epidemic in South Africa, excuse me, is what they call the virgin cleansing myth, where there are men who believe that if they have HIV and they have sex with a virgin, it'll cleanse them of HIV and they'll be cured. And in some cases, they've even raped little girls and babies. And you were actually technically a child when you were 15. So have you come across a lot of that, if not directly, indirectly, in terms of when you counsel women?
Yes, I actually have. It is predominantly, the belief predominantly exists in the Black culture in South Africa. The absolute horror of that mystified, erroneous misperception of a stupid belief is how the most sacred and pure woman are preyed on. So there's almost that unspoken thing that if I am sitting with the potential of this disease, it takes a pure woman for me to actually cleanse myself. And so what you get here is that the women who tend to be violated are the most pure souls, are the souls who are not asking for it, who are in fact purity and the sacredity of their sacral area is one of their highest values. So it is really, you look at the misperception, you look at the erroneous belief, and you ask yourself, really in this day and age, is it a true belief, or does it become an over attachment of a payoff to an erroneous belief that no one would want to see as erroneous, not these men anyway, because to see it for its truth could really deny them then of the payoff, would deny them then of assuming a level of sick freedom, to be thinking in this way and to be operating in this way.
And I was wondering if a development of that kind of idea comes from perhaps a high rate of illiteracy. Some people don't have an education, they don't have access to information. So do you think that may be a factor as well?
I think illiteracy too in our society has become an excuse to perpetuate violation. Because for me, it does not take a literate person to be a person of conscience. And at the end of the day, violation really becomes possible in not the absence of conscience, but the choosing for conscience to be absent. And that becomes the payoff. That becomes the convenience. I spoke of non-accountability and non-consequence earlier. It's because these individuals don't need to account for their behavior that the behavior remains perpetuated. It's sick, and it's time for. We called a few weeks ago. We had a spate of girls, 7, 8, 9, 10, raped and raped and murdered in the month that we consider to be Women's Month, the month of August. For me, that said that we are failing as a society. There was an outcry. Where there was marches to Parliament. The president took the stand, no bail for rapists, and then there was this hype. 1 week ago, I was called to assist a case at a school where 2 grade 1 students, pupils, babies, had been raped by a grade 6 student, and the principal had done absolutely nothing about it. The perpetrator was at school. The system does not have adequate psychological support resources. So these 2 babies were never taken to trauma counseling. Nothing was done. And I asked myself, and I made the judgment error. I actually thought that the school principal was a male. And oh, the horror to find that a level of apathy and indifference could be existent amongst a fellow female. The children have been seen to. I've not been able to follow up on what's going to happen to the school principal and the perpetrator. But this is the reality of a system that is failing its women and its children. We need an immediate redress of justice. We need an immediate redress of the updating of human protection. On one of the same radio shows, we had an attorney saying that the protection of a woman is so outdated. When it comes to a burglary, for example, you are not supposed to shoot to kill. And so you're still dealing, society has changed, the morals have degenerated to a level where violation is really just the norm. But what has not changed are the protective mechanisms for women to actually, because things are more dangerous, how can it not be that a legal system has not yet been set up for us to protect ourselves more in a system that has become increasingly dangerous? We are now at a point where women, when they go out as a group, they will not even want to venture to a public toilet alone. One of your other questions was, how many women do you know who have been raped? And, I partially answered it and I said, well, my work has me interface with these women and children all of the time, or aspects of my work. But shortly, I think about a month ago, we had a public holiday and my friend asked me to accompany her and her two daughters on a drive. And after we went for a drive, we came and we had tea in a lounge. And as we sat in a lounge and they asked me about the last violation and I shared, we came to a realization that on that afternoon, I think it was either the 21st or 24th of September, it was our Heritage Day. On that afternoon, we came to a realization that the 4 women sitting in that lounge had all been sexually molested and violated. That my friend, who is now 63, 64, and her 2 daughters, one in the late 20s, one in the 30s, and here I was, a 52-year-old. So we looked at the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s was represented in that room. 2 of us actually experienced multiple traumas. And that for me was a moment of real awakening on a host of levels. The fact that silence has always existed for as long as it did, and women feel too stigmatized to speak out, even if it means speaking out within the context of a family unit. It's the fear of rejection. It is the fear of, could I put the light on? It's getting dark. Is the light still okay for you?
Yeah, it's fine, yeah.
Okay. And so for me, that was really a moment of wow. Here you had a system, you had women about representative of each decade, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and they had experienced sexual trauma. Yes, sexual trauma in different ways. The one rife thing that also certainly exists is that sexual trauma is not always the externalization of the stranger who comes in, or the burglar who comes in, or the meeting setup that happens. Sexual trauma in so many cases is the result of molestation and incest within the family. In fact, those 2 ladies, the precious souls who are now in their 70s, their levels and their levels of sexual trauma and the context of their molestation was really incest and molestation within the family unit. And so, as you know, sorry.
No, finish your point, yeah.
I was going to say, within the family unit, it almost becomes an even grayer area. The mystification of power becomes more mystified, because within the family context, you have the power dynamic is that of adult and child, that of parent and child or step parent and child. And again, here you look at children who have gone through these levels of violation and have even gone to the one individual whom they think they can trust. But mom is financially dependent on the dad who is molesting the child. And so to address that and remove him out of the equation creates a financial vulnerability. And so the very child who actually has this angel that speaks her truth, that finds the courage to speak the truth, as vulnerable as she is feeling, whether she's 6, whether she's 8, whether she's 10, goes to the one individual whom she feels is really her divine protector, and is not believed or is ignored. And so there are many, many adults who land up in counseling as a result of childhood trauma that was not yet processed, not because they refused to speak out, but because the adults in their life insisted on keeping quiet for all of the wrong reasons.
And thank you very much for sharing. And I think that the book that you're about to publish is very important. There probably, excuse me, there probably aren't nearly enough of them. So state the title of the book and the publishing schedule, also in terms of where it's going to be distributed, what are the parameters of the publishing of the book?
Okay, so the book, and strange that we're having this conversation today because she has just gone, the pre-orders have gone live on Amazon.com. The book is called Butterfly, My Soul Got Wings, What Life Has Taught Me. It's book 1. Book 2 is Waiting in the Wings. And Beyond Publishing is a US publisher who has bought into the validity and the authority of the story and the poetry in it. And so please visit Amazon.com for pre-orders. She goes live on Amazon for the actual sales on the 29th of October, and she goes live for print distribution on the 12th of November. It's for global distribution. She can definitely be bought on Amazon and certainly will be available in all major bookshops throughout the world. But today her pre-orders have gone live. Yeah.
Will you be doing a publicity tour as well, going around the world to appear on television and radio and what have you?
I am so hoping to do that, yeah. So hoping. I don't have the timelines yet, but certainly Canada and the US will be my first stops, and I'm looking forward to that. It's really about sharing the story. The book is, it's a tool of sustainability. The book really is not about my story in as much as it is a representation of the spirit of resilience that every single human being has. It is a representation of many untold stories, unarticulated stories, unsung heroes, people, and this is the beauty about the book. I loved to tell the story, and that is one of the highest purposes of my living, that if we don't share not just the pain, but if we don't share the triumph, we truly nullify the experience. So how possibly could I have gone through violation twice in my life and not share the coping mechanisms, not share the story? And so it's not the other thing that the book is not about. It's really not about rape only. It's really about the spiritual principles that have led to my victory, beyond emotional and spiritual captivity, of which the rape did play a major part. But there was other aspects. There were other aspects of my journey which was equally emotionally treacherous, and I share the journey. I share the triumphs on the journey, and I guess the book is an embodiment of one of my dreams having come true.
Well, thank you very much for this interview today. I appreciate it. I hope those male government figures hear you loud and clear.
I hope so too.
Okay. Thank you very much. Have yourself a great day, Lynn.
You too, dear. Bye then.
Bye-bye.